Hey Classroom 9, this is Miss S, and I'm here with a social studies lesson for the day. So we're just going to get right into this because we have a little bit of a video and a little bit of a longer article and then our Google form to finish off the lesson. So let's go ahead and get started.
It was the 1850s, and many Americans were itching to go west in search of new opportunities. In 1862, the U.S. Congress approved a plan to connect the railroads in the eastern United States with one in California. Two companies, the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific, got to work building the tracks. It was hard and often dangerous work. In May 1869, the two companies met in what is now Promontory Summit, Utah, completing the first transcontinental railroad and transforming the nation. 5 ways the Transcontinental Railroad changed America. It truly united the nation. Before the Transcontinental Railroad, traveling across the country was very difficult. It involved long, dangerous, uncomfortable journeys by stagecoach or horse-drawn wagon. The new railroad helped cut travel time between the Pacific and the Atlantic coasts from about 6 months to about 10 days. Now, people from different parts of the country could visit each other and explore new places. It led to more people settling the Wild West. The railroad traveled through the western portion of the country, known as the frontier. It was a vast, mostly unsettled area. But thanks to the railroad, settlers had easier access to the land in the West and could establish farms and ranches. Dozens of cities and towns sprang up along the railroad routes. Eventually, these western territories became states. However, the settling of the West also had negative effects. The U.S. government allowed the railways to run through tribal lands, breaking the promises it had made to Native American groups. Many Native Americans were uprooted from places they had called homes for centuries. It improved communication. Before the railroad, mail was mostly delivered by horse-drawn coaches, steamships, or horseback riders. Mail was easily lost, and it wasn't uncommon for letters to arrive weeks or even months after being sent. Trains changed all that, bringing mail from one side of the country to the other, usually within a week. It helped business boom. After the completion of the railway, America's economy got a boost. Goods made in the East could be shipped more quickly to towns out west, and fruits and vegetables from California could now be transported east in refrigerated railroad cars. The railroad helped existing businesses grow and led to the birth of many new ones. It reset our clocks. Believe it or not, most towns used to set their own times based on the position of the sun. Railroad companies also ran on their own, often different time systems. That meant 2 trains might be scheduled to cross the same track at the same time. With trains now running across the country, the system was a collision waiting to happen. In 1883, a standard time was established for the railroads. It split North America into 4 time zones. Many towns began following this system too, and the U.S. government later officially enforced it throughout the country. Today, hundreds of miles of historic line are still in use, and the Transcontinental Railroad remains one of the most important accomplishments in American history.
Alrighty, so let's go ahead and get right into the article. Oops, wrong one. So we are talking about railroads and what they have done to kind of change how the U.S. and the U.S. kind of worked and functioned. So starting at this yellow part, it says, as you read, what impacts do trains have on the U.S.? So as we're reading, think about that and think, what have we been able to do now that we have trains? So, starting here in the red, it says it's May 10th, 1869, and a spirited crowd has gathered in isolated Promontory Summit, deep in Utah Territory, to make history. Little more than a collection of tents and makeshift worker shacks, it's an unlikely spot from which to witness the transformation of the United States. Yet thousands of people have gathered here to do just that. All eyes are on Leland Stanford, president of the Central Pacific Railroad, as he raises a hammer to tap a gold spike into the track. Clang! Cheers erupt all around, and railroad engines blow their whistles. Men give speeches and pop open bottles of champagne. Then a telegraph operator types out a single word. Done. In an instant, people in New York, Chicago, and other cities receive the news and celebrate. Cannons blast, bell rings out. After years of planning and work, America's first transcontinental railroad is complete. From coast to coast, the entire country is now connected by rail. Moving over here. Why the fuss? In a way, that moment 150 years ago this month was a new beginning for the U.S. Just a few years after the country had been torn apart by the Civil War, the nation was still trying to heal itself. At the same time, Americans had dreamed for years of a system of railroads linking the states in the east to western settlements in California. Now the U.S. was joined together, literally and symbolically, by a marvel of engineering and human labor, the Transcontinental Railroad. Coming up to the top. Moving west. In the 1850s, the U.S. government began encouraging Americans to head west to claim some of the country's vast open areas. Pioneers were lured with the promise of owning their own land, but the trip could take months if they survived it at all. Horse-drawn wagons were constantly at risk of breaking down in parched deserts, on barren plains, or in the treacherous mountain passes. Nothing but actual experience will give one an idea of the exhaustive energy, the throbs of hope, the depths of despair through which we lived, one pioneer wrote. Trains could be quicker and safer. At the time, the eastern U.S. was connected by about 9,000 miles of railroad tracks. Trains had transformed the economy there by allowing goods and people to move rapidly. Building a railroad to California could bring the country and its prosperity west. So remember, back in this time, trains were one of the quickest forms of transportation. We didn't really have big trucks to move goods. We didn't have airplanes. So you have to remember this was the quickest way rather than taking the horse-drawn wagons. Coming down here where it says Congress gave the job to two companies. In 1863, the Central Pacific Railroad began laying tracks in Sacramento, California, working eastward. A year later, the Union Pacific Railroad began in Omaha, Nebraska, and headed west. By rewarding the companies with money and land for each mile of track, Congress turned the project into a real competition. A back-breaking job for workers. Laying nearly 1,900 miles of track across the nation frontier was an incredibly difficult job. Workers used picks and shovels to level the land. They chopped down trees, then they laid out the heavy metal rails and hammered in spikes to hold them in place. Workers were out there from sunrise to sunset, says Lucas Hucke, a park ranger at the Promontory Summit Gold Spike National Historical Park. It was heavy labor all done by hand, he explains. Most of the people working on the Central Pacific Line were Chinese. Many of them, or their parents, had arrived during the California Gold Rush, which began in 1848. Victims of racism, the Chinese were banned from almost all jobs. With limited options, up to 20,000 Chinese people agreed to take the grueling, dangerous railroad work that few white Californians would accept. Even so, they were routinely paid less for longer hours than white workers. As they progressed eastwards, these laborers were confronted with an incredible challenge: the Sierra Nevada mountains. The workers had to dig 15 tunnels through the peaks, most at high elevations and almost completely with no hand tools. To loosen the rock, they would chisel holes into it, fill the holes with explosive black powder, then light a fuse and rush to take cover. While blasting was risky work, the Central Pacific crews were in even more dangerous from avalanches which could strike in the mountains at any time. When the snow thawed after the especially hard winter of 1867, bodies of workers who had been swept up in snowslides were found with their tools still in their hands. Destroying a way of life. In the east, the workers of the Union Pacific were moving more quickly across the Nebraska plains. They included Civil War veterans, freed slaves, and many immigrants from Ireland, where the Irish potato famine had created millions of refugees. Their task was made harder by raiding parties from the Cheyenne, Sioux, and other Native American nations of the Great Plains who saw their presence as a threat. The native people had good reasons to be worried. The railroad cut through their land where they lived and hunted buffalo for generations. Now new towns of white settlers sprouted everywhere the tracks went, destroying their way of life. The U.S. government sent soldiers to fight back against the native people. In 1867, General William Tecumseh Sherman met with members of the Great Plains nations, warning them of what was to come. "We will build iron roads, and you cannot stop the locomotive any more than you can stop the sun or the moon," he said. The tribes continued to resist for a while, but they were eventually overpowered. "The white people have surrounded me and left me nothing but an island," Sioux leader Red Cloud would later say during a visit to Washington, D.C. "When we first had this land, we were strong. Now we are melting like snow on a hillside." Like Red Cloud, most Native Americans would soon be forced onto reservations. A nation transformed. By early 1869, the Central Pacific and Union Pacific were only miles apart in Utah Territory. Finally, the company settled on a location where their two lines would meet. Now the teams were in a race to reach Promontory Summit. In April, the Central Pacific construction chief bet a Union Pacific official that his men could lay 10 miles of track in one day. They did it, putting down 3,520 rails and 55,000 spikes in 12 hours. But few of those workers were at the celebration of Promontory Summit on May 10. By then, most of the people who had actually built the Transcontinental Railroad had been let go. History notes very little about them. None of the Chinese workers' names were recorded by the Central Pacific, including those small crews left behind to join the last rail. No white journalist at the ceremony was... sorry guys. Slow malfunction. So it says no white journalist at the ceremony was interested in reporting on their work, says historian Richard Chu, an advisor to the Museum of Chinese in America. Still, their efforts had a huge impact on the nation. Passengers could now travel from coast to coast in about a week. Immigration to the west surged. The railroad also boosted the nation's economy. trains began transporting raw materials such as timber and silver from the west to factories in the east. The U.S. became richer, more powerful, and more united. Not all Americans benefited equally from the railroad, however. Native Americans in particular were pushed aside while a growing nation swallowed their land. For better or for worse, the railroad transformed every part of the country that it touched, Park Ranger Hughie said. So, that is it for the article. I know it was a little bit of a longer one, but that's okay. So, for your Google form, you fill out your name, and then there are about 5 questions. Most of them are from the article, but if you look down at number 5, it's asking what the main purpose of the map on page 21 is. So let's look at this map real quick. So, looking at the map, what is the main purpose of it? Like, why did they show it to us? Is it to show where Indian Territory was in relation to Utah Territory? So do we even see in the key here where Indian Territory was? No. Was it to point out the distance between New York City and Buffalo? It could point out the difference, but I don't know that they would have made the whole United States map just for that. Was it to highlight the location of the Rocky Mountains? We see the Rocky Mountains here, so maybe. Or was it to help readers visualize how the Transcontinental Railroad connected the nation? So this would be the Transcontinental Railroad right here, starting in Omaha to the summit, and then from the summit to Sacramento, and then all of the ones basically on the east side of the state were ones that were already made. So which one do you think makes the most sense? D. I agree. The other 4 I'll let you guys do on your own. Don't forget your name and don't forget to submit at the bottom. Other than that, I think that's all I have for the day. I will see you guys in the next video, and have a wonderful day, Classroom 9. Bye.